Hello. I'm going to talk to you today about the importance and the absence of the consumer voice in determining policy. Now, one doesn't seem to follow the other in that sentence. Importance and absence. If it's so important, why is it absent? I'd like to start to just refer back to something that Fiona said earlier, which gives you a perfect example of the concept that we're looking at here. She spoke about MPs who are anti-vaping, but they're receiving 20 letters a week from people who found safer nicotine products helpful. That's a disconnect right there. And she also spoke about consultation that the Australian government did, and they enlisted a whole load of stakeholders, which include businesses, public health groups, cancer charities. But I was listening carefully. The one stakeholder that was missing in that list was consumers. And this is exactly what we're talking about. Why is it that the most important voice, that I'd argue, the consumers, are largely absent from the debate about tobacco harm reduction? So we'll sort of go into why. The report that's being launched today has a section, I hope everyone does read the report, it's a very good report, has a section on philanthropy capitalism. This is whereby rich people who like to do good works maybe haven't got time to do them themselves, but they think giving a bit back by way of huge amounts of money is the way that they can do their bit for society. At the moment, this entire debate seems to be dominated by just two men, just two rich American white men. And they're buying government policy worldwide, despite having very little understanding of the subject matter. Now, you know, some people say that they could be, you know, not very nice people, nasty, evil or something, but I'm always an adherent to the Hanlon's razor concept, which is whereby bad outcomes are usually due to incompetence rather than some nefarious issue or because of conspiracy. I mean, they're obviously very busy men, and they're driven by advisors, they're led by advisors, and their advisors are obviously giving them the wrong thoughts about what tobacco harm reduction products are. So the result we end up with is poor science amplified by poor media reporting, and that leads to harmful policy. By comparison, consumers, we're mostly organisation run by volunteers, have very near zero budgets, and the people we're up against are politically experienced. They're very media savvy, but they're being paid salaries, sometimes very good salaries, to learn those skills. And we have to learn these skills in our spare time after work. We've all got other jobs. We're also unable to obtain significant independent funding. We can't take industry funding because we'd be seen to lose independence. So the result, sadly, is the near global dismissal of the consumer voice in this debate. So this report does speak and tries to assess the number of safer nicotine product users in the world right now, and they say there could be up to 98 million, and yet their voices, the 98 million voices, are drowned out basically by just two rich white men in America. So we go back to the advisors. As I said, money buys influence, but it also buys research. Everyone knows, I think, who watches these things, that Michael Bloomberg recently put $160 million on the table specifically for research designed to make a case for banning flavours in e-cigarettes. Now, that's quite a temptation for anyone who's in a grant-maintained business of public health. They rely on grants. But two things I'd say about people who take that: if you're taking funding to produce research with a preconceived result, regardless of whether that's a good outcome or not a good outcome, you can't really call yourself a public health researcher. You're really a political activist, and they should be described as such. And also, I find that many people in that sphere of public health, I'd say the vast majority, are people who would probably classify themselves as progressive. They are politically left of centre, sometimes very left of centre, and they consider themselves to be progressive people with progressive ideas. But I don't really see how relying on and taking money from two rich white American capitalists and producing research which can impact badly on some of the poorest people in the world can at all be called progressive. It seems to me the very definition of regressive. The problem with these people in public health, they seem to be stuck on the old public health versus industry debate. They're still fighting big evil tobacco companies, whereas the whole landscape in nicotine use has changed considerably. There's a massive difference really between studying a standard 3R, 4F cigarette and vaping and other delivery systems which have tens of thousands of different combinations, tens of thousands of different ways of using them, and tens of thousands of different types of people. It's a completely different landscape of nicotine use. Customers now, you see, are the experts. We are the ones who know more about these products than researchers, but they don't speak to consumers. As we said earlier with the consultation, that consumers are not on that list that are being consulted. Vapers in this country, I know for a fact, they took the concept of Honlick's e-cigarette and they developed it themselves. They then innovated. They're the ones who set up businesses, and they're the ones who started the original vape shops. They're the independent industry. They've set up small and medium enterprises and still do. We understand the products, we understand the concepts, we understand the consequences better than anyone. Industry, by comparison, have had to follow the customers because they were late to the party. Customers are leaving their traditional products, and industry had to react to that and start making those products on their own. So the fact that now some tobacco companies have got involved in making safer products is a result of consumers making their own decisions and moving to safer products themselves. So what's the result of excluding consumers from research? Well, we get bad research. We get puerile research on an almost weekly basis now. 40 or 50 studies every week, and a lot of them are just quite laughable. I mean, the archetypal one, the perfect example is the early study that found formaldehyde in e-cigarettes. But then if you run them at the very top wattage and burn the wick dry, you're going to get formaldehyde. It's just a terribly run study. And if they'd have spoken to consumers, they might have got a study that was actually useful, but they didn't. It's hard sometimes to imagine that it's not intentional, but we have to try and consider that they may be altruistic and they really want, and they really believe these things are dangerous, but they should talk to consumers, otherwise you get bad research. I mean, just because my car has a theoretical top speed of 130 miles an hour does not mean that I'm going to drive around at that speed, and I don't think anyone who owns the car I've got would do the same. So all this bad research leads to misleading and harmful media reporting, and that leads to harmful policy. But it's not just research. Consumers are ignored in many other areas. As many know, we're blocked on social media. We're dismissed as shills by people who are funded by these two rich American white men. There's quite an irony in there. And we're excluded from policy consultations, as I've mentioned before. But we face threats from these people. The EU is coming back again. They're basically going back to fight the same battles they fought in 2010. They're still stung by losing to a big consumer voice in 2014. And of course, as Marina's just spoke about, we have the WHO, which is coming out with COP next year, and they're looking to impose all sorts of prohibitive restrictions all over the world on safer products. So we have a summary of the problem is a massive imbalance of influence favouring a small number of well-funded groups exercising power by the WHO, the EU and national governments. And we have 98 million safer nicotine product users all around the world who are badly affected by this. So what needs to happen? Well, consumers have got recognised that how vitally important our voice is. We are the most powerful voice in the world. There's 98 million of us. There are just two white men. Apathy is dangerous. We mustn't be apathetic. You can never think that the government's got your back. We see a lot of that in the UK with the EU's TPD. Many vapers think it's all over with one, everything's going to be fine. But although we've left the EU, or we will be leaving the EU officially on the 1st of January, the British government will be keeping a lot of directives dictated by the EU, and it's not absolutely clear that we won't have to follow anything the EU comes out with in the future. So you have to be watchful in these circumstances, and no battle is won at the moment. Politics is a long game. It takes years to get your point across, and we just got to keep making that point as strongly as we can. We can make a difference. European Tobacco Harm Reduction Advocates, ETHRA in Europe, has managed to force itself around the table with the EU and is recognised as a stakeholder for the EU Tobacco Products Directive deliberations. So, but all consumer organisations need more help and support. We're all slowly learning all over the world how to fight back against these people. We're learning more politically ways of doing things, and we mustn't expect other people to do it for consumers. You've got to get in there and do some of this yourself. What needs to happen with professionals who support tobacco harm reduction? We've got to recognise this imbalance of power and influence and try to correct it. You've got to support and amplify the consumer voice, and always involve consumers in research and policy discussions. You might be surprised how much good work you can get done if you talk to the people who are using these products, because they, as I've said before, are the experts. And please, professionals, if you're on the side of tobacco harm reduction, please stand up for consumers. Don't support organisations who deplatform or dismiss them. So the conclusion, we've got highly funded researchers and activists who will never stop spreading information, but we've got 98 million consumers who should make their voice heard, because that is extremely powerful voice. And if we did all speak with one voice, it's far more powerful than just a few activists and a couple of rich American men. So we've all got to do a bit, consumers and professionals. It's very sad that we see at the moment the rich basically beating up the little guy, you know, billionaires in America funding policy which impacts on poor people in Africa. It's just all upside down, and consumers have got to recognise the threat, understand that they are the real power, and others who support tobacco harm reduction must help consumers to be heard, because we have a voice and we need to use it. So thanks very much.